Avatar: The Last Airbender, North and South. Like all of the other arcs, I've already read this one, but I don't remember anything about the plot events, and that's not a good sign. I just have a vague idea. Surprisingly, the story starts by wasting our time with Katara being told to go outside and appreciate the looks of her hometown by her mom, only for it to be revealed it was a dream. We already knew she missed her mom. Katara and Sokka don't find any of their surroundings familiar. Eventually, Katara decides to have fun penguin sliding. How convenient that the penguins are fine with people riding them. Somehow they find a regular house under construction here, even though building houses with ice is free and much faster. This would only make sense for a place with no benders at all. And Katara is the only waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe, and she came here to go home, and the South Pole's been cut off in contact from the North Pole for a while. Eventually, someone gets mad about trespassers, and Katara lampshades a bunch of grown men planning to attack kids, which would only hurt if their snowbending had ice in it, and it doesn't have to scare them away. Katara eventually scares them, and one of them says they weren't going to hurt them. But there's no proof that he was telling the truth here, considering that she just scared him with superior magic skill. I don't know why these kids that were brats to the heroes earlier were insisting on playing here of all places. They find out their village was replaced with a pretty ice city, and I hope it's explained what took so long. They see their aunt, and somehow one of the people here thinks everything's always on fire in the Fire Nation. One of them compliments the heroes, and Katara hugs her grandma with them all saying predictable things. It turns out the jerk who refused to tutor Katara at first because she's a girl got married to their grandma. It's good for her because he might have changed, and it being good for her is the only reason I get why the writer gave him a happy ending. I'm mostly just happy because the writer cared enough to resolve a plot thread when he didn't have to. Their grandma says their father is praising them constantly, and he works in the town hall. Katara and Sokka hug their dad, who doesn't hold it against them how long they took to return, and introduces them to people who helped improve on their homeland. The heroes get flattered, they see the construction workers again, and again Katara lampshades that they should have put up a fence. Something that made a whole scene completely unjustified to happen. Especially since their boss had been telling them to make a fence for a long time. These people hated that kids were trespassing multiple times. They had no excuse. Katara is told this is a temporary building for her dad to stay in, and she says it's too fancy for him. So I don't know why in the world this other woman is such a drooling idiot that she thinks she'd like seeing a palace for him, when she made it clear she's too obsessed with tradition and her personal nostalgia for her childhood to appreciate such a good-looking building. Melinda says a palace commands respect, and it's explained that the Southern Water Nation would benefit from looking more like it's on the same level as the other nations. I'd like stuff to start happening again instead of non-stop talking. Sokka gets flattered, and Sokka smartly agrees to go to a restaurant with them. And even though Katara said it's been a long day, she still goes there. Melinda gets made more relatable because she isn't used to the way cooking tastes differently over here. Eventually a briefcase gets stolen from one of them, which might not have happened if he had kept it at home. But since they know the contents, maybe they'd have stolen it from his home too. Someone else throws something at Melinda, and the thieves get to a snowmobile from the 1800s. Predictably, Katara eventually does use her magic to make a snowmobile of snow. The heroes head for a cliff, and it's realistic that Sokka complains that his hands are freezing from what he's sitting on. Their ice snowmobile shatters from a fall, and Katara catches up with the thieves and finds out where they headed. There's no reason Sokka would have thought someone who looked like an airbender was a spy for the Fire Navy, as opposed to looking like a waterbender to be subtle. Eventually, despite Katara's warning, Sokka walks into a tripped wire because he wasn't looking up enough and falls into a trap door. She follows him down a slide and gets happily greeted by someone named Gillick, who knows them because he used to fight the Fire Nation with her father. He gets given their exposition and guides them to a room full of patriots for the old ways. Gillick explains that strong countries are the only ones that survive based off what happened to the air nomads in the south, whose chiefs really like each other, and they've paid for it. He says that while he admires their father, he's not happy about him inviting foreigners to their country. If he knows that not being strong is what makes a country fail, why would he want his country to stay the way it is? His dialogue shouldn't have been written. And he calls the North tribe cowards, rather than praising them for being strong. He gets to explain that he said that because the Northerners just hid behind an icy wall while the Southerners were the ones fighting the Fire Nation, being strong as people, and they paid for it. So he doesn't really make any sense. If anything, not being strong makes you survive. Gillick thinks that all foreign presence has to be gotten rid of to make their nation strong, despite the impressive water city clearly resulting from someone getting the help of outsiders. And the fact that obviously he's only planning to make foreigners go to the city, specifically to make it even stronger. He ends up complaining that Melinda's trying to make the South tribe a cheap imitation of the North one. The heroes whisper to each other, and somehow Gillick doesn't react to this. Why does he think Katara would ever join him? He threatens Sokka, and waterbending gets used to make sure he can escape. It looks cool that Katara covers her arms in icy water that swats away someone's spear. I wonder if this was before or after that villain in The Legend of Korra that did the exact same thing to compensate for not having arms. Katara creates an ice wall to keep the guards from going after them. Then an old man starts telling them a story, and she and Sokka lose all of their IQ by standing there as the wall keeps getting progressively more broken, just to listen to the story. I think it was intentionally stalling them. The heroes escape anyways, and Katara uses waterbending to make another snowmobile, and Sokka decides to use the seal jerky as something to throw to lure the animals after them away. It's lampshaded that their grandma's hut is the only one still standing, just because people like her. But there's plenty of other people who would have a good reputation and didn't get that special treatment. Eventually, Malik gets annoyed because the thieves got away scot-free after hurting someone he loves. He complains that apparently there's no police here. Even if they were, they'd be useless because they wouldn't be right next to the restaurant on cue. Eventually, after it's revealed that Melina is his sister, not his wife, which of course someone got confused by with how he was acting, Sokka barges in when his father's kissing Melina. Thankfully, the next panel cuts ahead to the next day where Hakoda's army is planning on invading the caverns under the ship. I wonder if they'll fail to get to the people there because it's so early in the story arc and get mad at the heroes. Predictably, they can't find them. But don't think the heroes were lying, actually. They might have if they didn't leave a message on the wall, which doesn't benefit them. Eventually, Sokka reasons with Katara pointlessly that she's being selfish by disapproving of who her dad dates and would never be okay with anyone that's not her mother. Why does Malik think he was talking for 10 minutes? It was only a page. Melina says she wants oil extracted to lift up the South. Malik likes the idea of the oil-running engines so that machines could finally be everywhere, to make non-benders more equal to benders. Katara sure is being polite when she lies that she never thought of benders as superior. Sokka and him geek out over the earth and fire industries. Why does someone say representative if that's not the real term? So this was a good excuse for Toph to be a part of the arc, when it could have easily been some other industries. Her friends hug her as they wonder how she was a completely forgettable part of the arc. She says that the snow around her makes her seismic sense fuzzy, and hits Sokka with that as her fake excuse. It makes sense if she can see a little bit, because there's a continent below the snow of Antarctica. It's not just ice. She tells people thanking her for showing up to just call her Toph, and she says she's a big fan of the future. Melina tells Katara and Sokka they're the guests of honor for the city's new festival. Toph sees a game, and that's her excuse to walk away from Katara so Paku can introduce his new female students to Katara, proving that he's changed. It turns out they've been refusing to show him they can waterbend and only do it when they think he's not watching. They're from the Southern Water Tribe, so Katara isn't that special anymore. Eventually, Katara goes to her father and asks a stupid question about why he didn't tell his kids he had a girlfriend. Of course he knew she wasn't ready to know. She isn't. He says he knows Melina comes off as gruff. No, she doesn't. She's been almost completely nice the whole time. Katara would be biased into seeing her gruff because she can't stand change, and Melina clearly prefers the superior North. He hugs her, and has stupid cheesy dialogue that when you're really in love, in a self-sacrificial way, it doesn't blind you. He has no evidence for that. And self-sacrificial love will make you more blind than ever. I'm thinking of a certain blue fox with that description, even if it's not romantic love. Eventually she sees Aang show up on Appa. Both of them I also forgot were a part of this arc. This is feeling like hollow pandering. Aang hugs Katara, who wisely decides not to kiss in front of her father, who insists on just being called Hakoda by him and thanks him for the congratulations. Hakoda tells them to enjoy the festival and she thanks him, and realizes she should act more like her father because he's accepting of who she dates. She thanks Melina, who says she thinks the world of her and Sokka, and she's delighted to see Aang too. She thanks Katara for playing to introduce her to him. I've seen these games they're playing before in my life, so I'm kinda bored by them. I hate that there's a long, boring speech of nothing but recap to us. A machine drills up from under the ice, scaring people away. Hey, why does he have an advanced machine like this if he's not Fire Nation or Earth Kingdom? And he's all about tradition. Did he steal it from one of those countries? I mean, is one of them a genius prodigy that invented a drilling machine despite not having the education to make it? Gillick's speech is more interesting because he's angry. Gillick says the oil is going to be claimed for the North, and if he had proof, he should have shown it off earlier. He says the briefcase has documents about a plan to make the Southern Water Tribe essentially a colony of the North, because the North's going to decide how the oil is extracted, what it's used for, and where it's shipped. Melina admits that it only used to be the plan to colonize this place. She says while she never used the word colony, the North were worried they weren't able to handle oil, but were wrong. Malik reveals that he never cancelled the plans, which makes no sense because of how dedicated he is to her. He eventually says this isn't about money either, which reminds us that this isn't a black and white morality thing for little kids. That makes sense, but this is more nuanced. He lampshades that the people here have no idea what this oil means. I mean, it is the first time they're exposed to it. Eventually, Melina says she plans on stepping down from the reconstruction and leaving the South Pole first thing in the morning. But that would mean ending the arc early. That'd also be a lame ending. But it's still annoying that the bad guy grabs the conflict ball and has the soldiers attack despite getting what he wanted. Why can't he just have his soldiers attack when she's about to leave? Because then she would be a lot more alone instead of surrounded by people who could protect her. It's no wonder I didn't remember why they were considered villains before coming back to this. I forgot what they did wrong because they did literally nothing. Aang helps out by blowing away the bad guys. I guess Katara could have sent them away herself by waterbending a large force of water. She somehow gets hurt even though she was clearly trying to protect Melina, so that's annoying. But it'd be far more annoying if the story didn't forget she was hurt right after she got up. And Melina's really worried about her right away. The old man from earlier says that of course his story was related to his hatred of the North. This just treats the audience like idiots for not figuring it out. Complete with a fake out where it makes you wonder if Katara will side with him, and of course she doesn't because we're supposed to think she's a good person. And that would mean siding against her father, so of course she's not going to do that. Out of nowhere, he reveals he's a chi blocker, which is an asshole because he's not where from Tai Lee's from. Aang gets snuck up on from behind and grabbed, and he airbends with his feet, and conveniently the soldiers let him go for no reason. So he blows them away with his hands, and Toph fights too. Why does Sokka lie to the bad guys that he doesn't think he's better than him as a person, when he's immediately gonna say he's better than him as a boomeranger? So it's not like he's too polite to be honest. Out of nowhere, Katara waterbends anyways because she doesn't need her arms to waterbend. I thought chi blocking and bending be restricted. I don't remember this being a thing. I'm glad this isn't an excuse to kidnap her. Instead, his chi blocking was pointless to write, so no wonder it was forgettable. So she freezes him. Thanks an officer, so apparently there are police here after all. And somehow Aang immediately notices something wrong with her arms for no reason at all. A bunch of stuff happens that can be summarized as Melina gets threatened. There's no reason that the leader of the bad guys would make a speech instead of attacking her much earlier. He's used to fighting. And he could have talked much less and gotten the same effect. Hakoda grabs him and says that of course he already knew the truth about Melina because he's respected as a character, and says that after she got to know his people, she changed her mind. The story wastes my time some more. Why should I care about a fight scene where all of the action is censored? It's only mildly nice to see the jerk get hit because I'm not really seeing the foot impact his chest. And these action scenes are almost the whole appeal of the series and it not just being words. As soon as Hakoda started asking him if he remembers a part of their past together, I immediately assumed he would try to talk sense into him. He reminds him that he saved him in the past, somehow thinking there's any chance of reasoning with him after the last few scenes. I only sort of care about him getting hurt because it's an idiot ball that forced this to happen. Besides, having a flash of light at a time like this is very cheesy. Why write this if you're not allowed to show it? Katara reunites with her father right away, so she gets to heal him. Good for her that she happened to be close by after all. Some water bending stops the bad guys from getting away. I don't know why in the world her father's talking quietly when he was healed by magic, and she's a master waterbender. There's no logical reason he wouldn't be completely healed. Katara thinks taking oil out of the ground here in the first place is crazy, without knowing that it would accelerate climate change. So there's really no reason for her to think this. You know, there's no reason that Hakoda would have lost that much blood anyways, because he was right next to a waterbender. She could have just made some ice and held it against him. Katara asks Melina if she'll keep being on her side after she falls out of love and gets reassured. Katara makes this even more sad, being unlikely heartless just because she was dating her father. Eventually I see the bad guy's leader get slipped the key by a guard because his speech got to him earlier. Eventually Toph's annoying students bore me for a page before there's an avalanche, and it turns out they're constantly in danger of this here. Why couldn't the writers show me good content to waste comic space instead of this mind-numbing boredom? Eventually, Katara sees the students from earlier and oppresses them because she and Aang are here. Predictably, they were hiding their magic because their parents told them not to reveal it or the Fire Nation would take them away. And somehow, Katara isn't able to convince them to let Pakku teach them. Then the scene was a complete waste of my time. Why aren't they being told that Zuko's in charge now so they have nothing to worry about? Idiots! All of them! This isn't how people interact! And the previous scene with these kids didn't need to exist. Ugh, this didn't need to be 3 issues. And you could have justified it being 3 issues if you just had longer fight scenes. Hakoda goes into the room so he can get overwhelmed with even more extremely boring dialogue. At least Pakku thanks the heroes. And Hakoda praises Katara and thanks her team. Katara wastes her time nagging her father, who shouldn't even have to convince him because these are the same people that learned a lesson about how great it is when people in multiple different countries cooperate in the promise. She told Aang about his hypocrisy with dating a waterbender, and now she's being hypocritical. We don't need to see the 2 sides of the story more than once. She's treating the North and South like they're separate countries. Doesn't that mean there's 5 nations? If anything, she should be grateful that they're bringing balance to the world, when it was unbalanced by having 5 nations instead of 4. It's undoing the unbalance that the Fire Nation started in the first place by kidnapping waterbenders. Because this is going to open up the way to more waterbenders coming here. Eventually, the Earth King and Zuko show up at the South Pole, with Kui being all excited but thinking it's freezing cold. It's nice to see his bear hug him. He tells Zuko he could join in, and it really shows how much he warmed up to him. I get to see Sokka hug Zuko and thank him for something he was obligated to do. And Zuko calls him buddy, saying it's good to see him. I can't get enough of him being openly friendly with them for a change. Kui calls Sokka his friend. Eventually, Gillick unlocks the cell door. At least he tried to see if the next guard was on his side first. He thanks someone, having a sweet moment, and Katara is somehow against the idea of her homeland getting harbors and embassies. There's being traditionalist and there's being bigoted. This is out of character. Zuko says he'd love to help the tribe rebuild. Eventually, a guard gets knocked out by a boomerang, and the bad guys barge into the room, and nothing but predictable stuff happens. The scene would have been fun to see if it showed the impact against the bad guys. It was cool to see a boomerang cut strings and cause a chandelier to fall. It's not like Katara and Sokka's friends were useless in this arc, they're fighting here after all. But so are Katara and Sokka. It could have easily been written that they didn't need their help. That there were less enemies, and Katara is more than capable of crowd control with her magic. Eventually, Gillick knocks out Hakoda and picks him up, and after entirely too many pages for no good reason, Aang catches up to him and waterbends to force him up so that he drops Hakoda. Considering how fast Aang can fly, this should have been faster paced. Gillick gets away again, because it's not the end of the arc yet. Zuko reveals that the Earth King was kidnapped. And again, somehow Hakoda isn't instantly fully healed by a magic magician healer because forced drama. Eventually, Gillick's bird gives Hakoda a letter demanding Hakoda in exchange for the Earth King at a bridge over lethal terrain. Zuko is smart enough to know that Gillick's gonna cut the bridge even if his demands are agreed to. And somehow his friends don't believe him. So the heroes decide to trust Sokka for a plan. Fortunately, the arc doesn't tell us that plan to waste even more space. Aang kisses Katara's cheek, reassuring her. After she whines for a million years when I got it the first time, the heroes get chi-blocked. So did they get trained by Tai Li? Sadly, the comic insists on having a bunch of dialogue when they do that, even though chi-blocking doesn't take that long and it's not fun to read. Even Sokka gets chi-blocked out of paranoia and he's flattered. Hakoda expresses concern over them. Kui and Hakoda go to the middle of the bridge. Of course Zuko is right, and the evil plan gets foiled by some ice from Melina, who's taking advantage of Toph's students for backup. There's no reason Hakoda would bother asking who they are and let this guy say all of this boring dialogue I have no interest in. The metal bending disables the weapons, and the heroes get their bending back because it's been long enough. So they know it's predictable. Katara freezes a few people. I think she could have handled all of this herself. Because if she can control an entire ocean, limited only by what she can see, you'd think she'd be able to freeze everyone she can see. Gillick eventually goes over to Hakoda, but Melina grabs him and Zuko gets rid of the fire. The bridge breaks, and Zuko uses his powers to save the Earth King. Toph is mandatory for the plot resolution here by keeping the bridge from falling. It's an absence of something happening rather than something happening, visually wise, so it's not memorable. She buys Katara time to go down an ice ladder, and Aang's mandatory for the plot by gliding in the air while flying so that Hakoda and Melina can get saved. Gillick moves around a bunch, and I have to assume it's to make it too hard for Aang to keep holding them. So he lets himself fall because he's stupid. Melina thinks Aang can't support her weight, so she decides to let go of Hakoda to save everyone else. So she starts falling, which is the second of one of the only memorable parts of the entire arc, and I can't believe I forgot what happened. Katara creates some ice and saves her. She slams into the wall, getting some much-deserved slapstick for her behavior in the arc as a whole. Too bad the camera angle wasn't from the side, so it didn't fully show the impact. She thanked, and Katara says that she thought she wanted her homeland to be the way it used to be before the war, but out of complete nowhere, the only thing she wanted all along was a home with her mother in it. Yeah, right, that's why she was non-stop whining about the pretty ice buildings in the factory as a concept, no matter how many jobs it'd create, and money it'd give to her people. And she didn't even like harbors and embassies being there. Despite the fact that she's got lots of friends who aren't Water Nation, and saw all sorts of people who weren't Water Nation, so she should know that they're not all awful. This thinks it's being a touching moment, but the arc made her too unsympathetic for me to take this seriously after the center panel. That and the arcs made me extremely bored so many different times that I've got no interest in even more unnecessary dialogue. The first pages of the arc already reminded me that she misses her mother. Katara is still against the oil refinery, even after she warned up to Melina. I have to assume the reason the reluctant students are even here is specifically so Katara could manipulate them into changing their minds by telling them about her past. These kids shouldn't have needed to be told why their mother sent them here because it was immediately obvious. The story cuts ahead to the Earth King Coda in the last remaining hut, and there's an on-the-nose bit of forced dialogue that this is the highest form of civilization because of the warmth of these people. Even though there's good people in his country too, in the same way. This won't convince him. Because of the bloodthirstiness of the bad guys in the Ark, who are opposed to the ice walls and the place being made a stronger nation, it doesn't do anything to tell this guy, hey, these guys can be advanced sometimes. Though to be fair, only Gillick and his people are idiots. It makes sense that he wouldn't think the entire Southern Water Tribe wasn't so impressive. It's too bad Gillick and his people were never told about the fact that becoming more advanced would result in better medical technology, causing less people to die ridiculously early. And so they're objectively wrong and bad for their people. Aang and his friends show up saying they finished cooking for Katara's grandma, and an entire page is wasted on them explaining what they cooked one at a time, and the story ends there. Finally. This arc was by Jean Yang, and was about a civil war in the Southern Water Tribe because Sokka's dad wants to make the place more advanced with the help of people from other countries. So the idiots going to war with him over it have a realistic motivation. It was good for the most part, on paper, but Katara sucked, and sometimes it was really boring, getting a huge padding problem in the middle. I don't need to be reminded of the differing perspectives of the characters. I got it the first time, and it's not exactly enjoyable, when Katara's being nothing but irrational and spiteful, when she could have easily not been written that way, and it'd make just as much sense to us because she's supposed to be a good person. Also, it was very forgettable. The only memorable parts being when Katara's stepmother falls and has to be saved, and the fact that she even has a future stepmom. I think part of why it's forgettable is that it's mostly just talking, which doesn't leave an impression on you. It being a comic book gives it a lame excuse to have flashes of light censor all of the impact in the fights. I'd gladly take exciting fights for padding over the dialogue though, so they obviously should have had the action scenes last a lot longer and had a lot less dialogue. Maybe part of why it's forgettable is that it entirely takes place in an area that mostly looks the same everywhere.